Hello, friends, family, AA members, non-AA members. This is my first video in a 6-part series of how not only to get sober, but to stay sober. First, who am I to say this method works? Who am I to make these claims? I'll explain who I am and just how much can change in a few years. A little over 4 years ago, I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. I was proud, I was confident. It didn't only take a few months for all of that to go away. I began to struggle with anxiety, depression, alcohol abuse, drinking on a daily basis. I then began to contemplate suicide, and on July of 2015, I acted on it. In a drunken rage and stupor, the police were called to my house to talk me out of shooting myself. I was surrounded by 12 or 15 officers while I sat in my car with a loaded gun. I spoke to my mother on the phone, who I then told I wasn't going to kill myself. I was going to have the police do it for me. So I got out of the car and I began to raise the gun in the direction of the police, who did exactly what I would have done if I were in their shoes, and opened fire. I ended up being shot 6 times and rendered one of my arms only half functional. And bleeding out in my parents' front yard in front of my entire family. Of course, when I woke up in the hospital, I was on every pain medication under the sun. I had finally found the answer to my alcohol and drinking problems: drugs. In less than a year, I went from being a proud Marine Corps veteran to a suicidal drug addict. My obsession with drugs from there only grew. It turned into lying, stealing from my family and friends just to get what I wanted. I ended up going in and out of jobs, but one of the longest jobs I held was, in a year, I went from, again, being a Marine Corps veteran to cleaning up human shit and used needles on my hands and knees in the abandoned houses in downtown Baltimore. I went in and out of jobs and in and out of a relationship for almost 2 years, just miserably floating through life. Move on to about 2 years ago, when we found out that my daughter was on the way. And I made a choice, just as I made a choice to start using drugs. I wanted to be an excellent father. I wanted to give being a dad my everything. And no, not just your average, just their dad, but I wanted to be the absolute best to my daughter, who means absolutely everything to me. It took only 2 years for me to completely rebuild my life, to construct an incredible future for me and her. In less than 2 years, I went from fighting just to be able to see my daughter for an hour or two at the mall to having full custody of her. In less than 2 years, I went from scraping up human filth and used needles off the floor on my hands and knees to wearing a suit and tie to work every day, to have my own office, to be able to counsel families, all while making an incredibly good living for me and her. In my first year of sales, I was crushing it at bonuses and quotas. In my first full year of sales, I finished 9th in the entire country in total sales. I went from bleeding out in my parents' front yard to raising a daughter as a single father with 1.5 functioning arms. Drug abuse, anxiety, depression have all become a thing of the past. This all stems from one thing, and the first part to getting sober is you need to find a purpose. Finding a purpose sets the foundation for everything I will talk about in these next 5 videos. It took some serious thought for me to realize what my purpose is, to look at life and realize that this is the only life that we live. There are no redos. That you have one chance to live your life in a meaningful way. to live life without the burden and restrictions of things like drug abuse, anxiety, depression. That you have one life, and you can choose whether it be spent in a miserable career that depresses you and you hate, or in a career that you love, you succeed in, and brings you happiness. I had to wake up to the fact that you have one and only one chance to raise your children. That you have one chance to give them everything, to be a parent, to be there for them, to give them the best chance to succeed in life. When getting sober, the main point behind finding a purpose is that it needs to be something that when you wake up in the morning, you look forward to it more than you do picking up that first drink or using that first drug. It needs to be something that you're willing to fight for every single day. If your purpose is just to get sober with no idea why or reason behind it, you will fail. It needs to be something that you're willing to set weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly goals to achieve. Back in 2017, I bought one of these little notebooks, and each month I would fill it out and track how I was progressing. It brings you a lot more satisfaction when you can actually see how you're progressing, when you write it down. It needs to be something that brings out your willpower, your effort, and determination. Alcoholics Anonymous and these 12-step groups love to demote all of this, these key characteristics and traits that are needed to get sober. This softer, newer, self-entitled generation are so easy to fall into this. They love to preach, oh, willpower kills, willpower will kill you. No, not enough willpower will kill you. They preach right from their text that they wish they could find an easier, softer way. It's harder to hold on to things that you didn't have to work hard to get. These programs like to devalue things like setting goals and preaching to people, oh, just for today, just live for today, take no thought for tomorrow, just let go and let God. You need to find a purpose that you are willing and you are able to set goals to achieve. I remember when fighting for custody for my daughter, my sponsor telling me, just let it go, just focus on me, it's out of your hands. Excuse me, but fuck that. I threw out my step work, I threw that to the side, and I started working on a parenting plan. Rather than spending an hour each night at a meeting talking about drugs and alcohol, I spent my time researching and taking notes on what judges look for in a custody case. Rather than spending countless hours on the phone with my sponsor, I started calling lawyers. Because of this, I was able to gain more and more time with what was truly important to me. Without a purpose, without a reason to live, without a reason to get sober, you're nothing. You have to see it, whether you're a member or not. In these AA and NA meetings, you see these people that are just floating through life, that are just going through the motions. So many of these members get trapped in this just for today nonsense that they lose sight of any type of future. They lose sight of all of the reasons of why not to go back to drugs. Like I said in the beginning, your purpose is going to set the foundation for everything I talk about in these next 5 videos. Your purpose can start off as something small and grow into something bigger. Maybe your purpose is to be a parent to your children again. Maybe your purpose is that your children have disowned you, and your goal is to be able to reconnect with them. Maybe you're in a miserable career that you're depressed in and you're not going anywhere in. And your goal in life is to find a career that'll bring you success and bring you happiness. No one's purpose in life is to become a statistic on the Overdose Awareness Board. Take it from me. Being on the other side of the table of a mother that has to plan the funeral of her child due to an overdose or suicide is one of the most excruciating things I have ever been through. Find your purpose in life. Find the willpower to live. follow these next 5 steps, and you will not only beat drug abuse, but you will make it a thing of the past. No living under the fear of relapse and temptation. No letting drugs and alcohol dictate the places you can go, friends and family you can associate with. No countless hours wasted in a church basement obsessing over and worshiping drugs and alcohol. I mean done and buried, so that you can live your life without these burdens and restraints. Part 2 of the series is going to be in a week. I'll see you guys then. Part 2 of how to get sober and how AA and these 12-step programs oppose anyone's ability to get sober. Part 2 is shedding this crippling, powerless, and victimhood mentality. Out of all of the lies and deceitfulness of AA and its counterpart programs, the forced idea that you are powerless is probably the biggest, most self-destructive and disastrous of them all. I'm not going to get into the is it a disease, not a disease debate here. That can be its own other series. Whether you think it's a disease or not doesn't matter. Call it whatever you want. But you are in no way, no shape, no form, powerless. Jim Battle brings up an excellent point on this subject. He says, take somebody who truly suffers from a disease that they're powerless to, like cancer, which AA members love to compare their disease to. Sit them at a table and put $1 million in front of them and say, hey, stop having that cancer for 24 hours and this $1 million is yours. It will not happen. Take somebody who is addicted to drugs or alcohol and put them in that same seat and tell them, hey, you don't take that next drink or take that next hit, and that $1 million is yours. I can guarantee you, no matter how callous the addict or alcoholic, they will control their intake. Suddenly, with the right amount of incentives and motivation, you are no longer powerless. I can't think of anything more self-destructive than teaching these people that they're powerless. Teaching these people that they're powerless when they're really not is teaching them to not even try and stop or to give in to temptation because they think, oh, well, relapse is just part of the disease. I'm powerless. Nothing I can do. Rather than build these people up, these AA cults only break people down, teaching them they're powerless and victims of their disease. A huge reason why I tell people to avoid AA and these NA programs is when you see someone that's growing confidence, when you see someone that thinks they can beat their addiction, these members will break them back down with constant reminders that, oh, well, you're powerless. You need to go refine your humility. Remember, you have no control over your disease. I remember a story in Outpatient where the counselors barely said a word and the AA members ran the groups. A man came in and objected the powerless idea. For an hour, I watched these members belittle and degrade this man until being coerced into believing he was powerless. Oh, you're a terrible father, right? Well, no, I think that's pretty decent. No, you did this and that. You're a terrible father. You're terrible at your job, right? Well, no, I think that's pretty decent. No, you did this and that. You're terrible at your job, too. Just to prove a point of powerlessness. How many people do you think have went out and killed themselves and others because of falling into this mindless trap? People who've went out and used for the last time, all because they were told, oh, you're powerless to your disease, you have no control. Or a drunk driver who went out and killed a family for listening to the same thing. If you look into these big-name rehabs who are raking in millions due to return customers, they love to push the mentality that their patients are powerless. With this mentality of powerlessness comes the mentality of victimhood. Every single day in rehab, we had to preach that we are powerless to our disease, that we are just victims of our disease, pawns of our disease. You can see the victimhood in these meetings simply by the amount of complaining. I remember a story a girl shared in one meeting of her life at home with her parents, who let her back in after 2 weeks of being sober. She described how her parents pressure her too much because they would tell her to go get a job and clean up the house and make sure she checks in on time. She then went on to describe how her parents are unreliable because they wouldn't watch her son while she went out to AA meetings every night. To add to this, her sponsor came up to console her by telling her that her parents just don't understand the disease. They don't understand that she needs to make meetings every night to keep her disease in remission, that her parents too suffer from the disease. These AA and 12-step programs play on the mindset that because of their disease that the whole world is out to get them, that they were dealt a bad hand, that unfortunate things only happen in their life. You can cut the narcissism with a knife in these rooms, it's so thick. The sooner you get rid of this mentality, the sooner you will realize how much control of your life you actually have. The sooner you shed this toxic, self-destructive mindset that you are powerless or you are a victim, the sooner you will come to realizing how much control over your brain you actually have. And that'll lead us into the next video. I'll see you next week. Part 3 of how to get sober and how AA and these 12-step programs oppose anybody's ability to do so. Part 3 is taking control of your brain. One of the best possible things I could have done when getting sober was to pick up a book and start reading. I started to read a ton of self-help books, and something that I saw consistently coming up and the most relatable to drug abuse is the ability to control your brain. When it comes to addiction, you either control your brain or it will control you. It's as simple as that. Dr. Lance Dotis describes this as beating addiction by understanding addiction. The one book I will forever say has changed my life is called You Are Not Your Brain. This book helped me to understand the concept of neurons that fire together, wire together. It helped me to understand how habits are formed, how to break the connection of bad habits and rewire them to positive and productive habits. When in active addiction, your brain has started to form connections out of your drug abuse. You wake up, you use. Something stresses you out, you use. Get home from work, you use. You feel depressed, you use. The key here is to break these toxic connections and habits and replace them with positive and more productive habits that are in line with your purpose and goals. You start off with replacing these habits with smaller, more tedious habits. Wake up, make your bed. Feel depressed, go out in public and socialize. Something stresses you out, go to the gym. Get home from work, take a 15-minute walk. These are all things that these multi-million-dollar rehabs teach people. It doesn't take thousands of dollars and families going into bankruptcy to save their loved ones to teach people this. You Are Not Your Brain breaks this down into 4 easy steps. 1 is relabel. Relabel these toxic brain messages. Call them what they are. You have the urge to use? Well, that's all it is, an urge. You have physically done nothing. 2 is reframe. Reframe from using all or nothing thinking. Reframe from emotional reasoning like, oh man, I had a really stressful day at work today. I deserve a couple extra drinks, or I deserve a couple extra pills. 3 is refocus. Focus your attention in the moment to the direction you want to go. You have the sudden urge to use? Well, you also have a list of goals you want to accomplish. What could you be doing in that moment to accomplish those goals? And 4 is revalue. After following the first 3 steps, you can then revalue your cravings more rationally. Man, I made it through that urge without using. Are these cravings really as bad as I'm making them out to be? Steps like this help beat addiction by understanding addiction. Programs like Smart Recovery and Rational Recovery follow this, and cognitive behavioral therapy, and dig at the more underlying issues of drug abuse. AA and these 12-step groups offer no such intellectual reasoning. Their mentality of, oh, you don't know what kept you sober another day? Well then, God did it, or see, the power of AA worked. If religion is your thing, that's fine. But don't let these 12-step groups use your religion as a means to explain something that they can't. Another thing that these 12-step groups do that SMART doesn't is they focus on nothing but drugs and alcohol. They teach people to revolve their entire lives around drugs and alcohol. Drug-related speakers every single night where they talk about drugs for an hour. How drugs and alcohol destroyed their life. How drugs affect them today. how much their drugs cost, where they got their drugs from, where they used to use at, how drugs made them feel, and then the room would share their experience with drugs. When you're in these AA and NA meetings and doing nothing other than talking and thinking about drugs and alcohol, your brain is only focusing on the idea of using. You are keeping the neurons that fire together wired together. This has led to disastrous problems like the incredibly high relapse rate, people having drug drains for weeks and months actually after getting sober, and living a life of constant temptation. Another incredibly disastrous mindset that these AA groups push is that with just one slip, you need to go all-out relapse. You need to go right back to where you started. You need to go find your new low or find your new rock bottom. Not only that, but now we're going to put you on a pedestal, and in front of everyone, you're going to have to go get your one-day chip again. And we're going to use you as an example. No. You have the ability to choose if you're going to let that one slip lead you back down the road you came in on, or if you're going to stop right there. You choose to end it or keep going. You don't need to be publicly humiliated for that. It's this mentality and practice that has caused people to go out and use for their last time, or remember to slip at a restaurant and then just think, well, I might as well go all out now, and go kill themselves or a family in an accident, all because they just think, well, that's what we're supposed to do, or want to avoid being humiliated. The same mentality stems from their idea that, oh, once an addict, always an addict, that for every time you speak at one of these meetings, you must start with, hi, I'm Joe and I'm an addict, or hi, I'm Mary and I'm an alcoholic, teaching people to take pride in their negative labels. This is utter bullshit. You're not an addict for life. You need to be building yourself up, but at the same time preparing yourself for what is to come, and preparing yourself mentally. AA and NA like to paint this picture that once sober, life becomes perfect, nothing but sunshine and rainbows, and to think otherwise makes you a mean, miserable, dry drunk. Well, guess what? Life's not always sunshine and rainbows, and to teach people this is setting them up for failure. Life sucks sometimes. You are still going to go through stressful situations. You are still going to have responsibilities. Being sober makes these situations 1,000 times easier, but you're still going to face situations that you find disappointing. Understanding that fact and mentally preparing yourself for those events will help you get through them. I went through 2 of the most stressful situations of my life while in my first few years sober. But I got through them easily by having control of my brain, by refocusing what are only negative thoughts into more productive ideas that are all in line with my goals and purpose. As I said before, you either control your brain or it will control you. And I'll see you guys next week. Part 4 of how to get sober and how AA and these 12-step programs oppose anyone's ability to do so. Part 4 is removing everything toxic in your life. First, you need to be able to differentiate between who and what is toxic and what isn't. And no, I don't mean this in the way that AA means you need to disassociate from your friends, your family, and your kids, and put yourself in these meetings first. AA likes to say, oh, your recovery and making meetings is more important than your kids and your family. As Jim Battle puts it, no, you can have both. How about both being important? Your parents who are telling you to get a job, to clean the house, to check in on time with them. Your children who, yes, are a lot of work and require a lot of responsibility. These are not toxic people. They're not enablers. They do not suffer from your disease as well. One of my favorite Les Brown quotes is, birds of a feather flock together. You run around with losers and you will end up a loser. Unconsciously, you will pick up their traits and their habits, and most importantly, their outlook on life. If you're constantly around cynical, negative people all the time, you will end up cynical and negative. You need to surround yourself with people who will contribute to your growth. When you surround yourself with people that can never get sober, are constantly relapsing, coming in and out of the rooms, people that just never grow up and still act like they're in high school, you will start to behave the same. These are very common characteristics and traits of these AA and NA members, and a very toxic part of their group. In these 12-step groups' over-exaggerated pursuit of happiness, they're not always teaching people how to work on bad character traits such as immaturity, laziness, and being temperamental, but more teaching them how to be happy with and accepting of these bad character traits. I think one of the biggest problems with these 12-step groups is that rather than try to get people out of the toxic environment that most people trying to get sober find themselves in, they would rather try to just make them happy in that toxic environment. This is putting a band-aid on a gushing wound. Rather than giving a man who is homeless the tools and direction to find a good job and eventually buy a house, they would rather only teach him how to be happy being homeless. Rather than help someone living on the street, surrounded by drugs and crime, get out of that toxic environment, they would only rather teach them how to be happy in that environment. A great example of this is all of these 12-step based halfway houses that they're opening here in my community, some just a few blocks away from schools, which the community itself is in an epidemic and is breaking its own record of overdoses and deaths each year. Yeah, I get the fact that people need a change of people, places, and things, but what sense does it make to take them from a community that's full of drugs and alcohol and place them in another community that itself is in an epidemic? On top of that, when these people fail out and they're kicked to the street because their families certainly aren't taking them back, congratulations, you've just added more people to the epidemic. When getting sober and removing everything toxic from your life, you need a clean house. There's some things that just should go without saying. The phone and number associated with your dealer and their friends needs to go. The social media accounts with your using and drinking buddies needs to go. No, I'm not saying you can't have a phone or social media accounts, but when getting sober, your dealer is losing money. No one likes to lose money. They are expecting and hoping for you to relapse. Keeping that same number they have associated with you is keeping an access point for them to continuously harass and badger you. When starting a new social media account, you need to be aware of the pages and friends you are adding. Mutual friends of your dealer are obvious people not to add. People who are constantly posting pictures of them out at the bar or of themselves high are people not to add. When it comes to certain pages you want to follow or like, there's some things you need to take into consideration. For example, let's say you love football and you want to follow things like the NFL or your favorite team. You need to keep in mind that huge sponsors of these pages are beer companies, and their advertisements will follow you onto your page. Relationships. Relationships can be one of the most toxic possible things for someone when getting sober, especially when both people are trying to get sober. The odds of being able to get sober when both suffer from a drug or alcohol problem are incredibly low. In most relationships like this, you will see this seesaw effect, where one is ready to get sober but the other isn't, and they continuously drag one another down, and this can go on for years. In a relationship like this, what you'll see is that when one is doing well and the other isn't, they start to get jealous. They feel like the other person is going to move on to bigger and better things, and that they're going to be left there in their own misery. Jealousy then turns into sabotaging the other to make sure that they're not left there alone. This is a toxic environment, and you need to get out of it. Yeah, it sucks breaking up with someone, and it's obviously harder when a marriage and kids are involved, but you will waste a lifetime thinking you aren't good enough for a relationship better than that, to think that your kids don't deserve a life better than that. Life is way too short to spend years in a relationship you aren't happy with, that makes you miserable, that only drags you down. These 12-step groups put people directly into these situations. When you start teaching people that they have a lifelong illness, that the only way to keep their illness in remission is to make weekly meetings, that requires a hovering parental figure, i.e. a sponsor, that you need to spend countless hours with each week, and all the other things that these 12-step programs instill in people to isolate them to the group only, you start to limit your choices to other members of the group only. Which is a huge reason why sex and dating within the rooms is so prominent. What are the odds that went out to meet a random girl, she say, "Oh, you have a chronic illness to drugs and alcohol? What luck, me too." My personal opinion on relationships is for the first year, don't have them. Nobody wants to be alone. It's human nature to want to be with somebody. But when you're looking for someone, when you're still trying to find yourself, when you're not happy with your life, you are drastically lowering your own standards. Once you have found yourself and you are happy and comfortable with the life you have gained from becoming sober, then you will find the right person. I want to paint you the picture of an incredibly toxic environment, especially for young women. Rooms that courts are now sentencing pedophiles, sex offenders, and other violent criminals into. Rooms where older men preying and sleeping on younger women is so prominent that the members themselves have given it a slogan and deemed it 13th stepping. That itself is so prominent that books, documentaries, movies have all been made just to show what women are facing when they walk into these rooms. And of course, I'm talking about the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. Which, by the way, how dare courts be able to force kids into that? Getting out of this toxic, self-destructive environment is what's going to lead into the next video. And I'll see you next week. Part 5 of How to Get Sober and how AA and these 12-step programs oppose anyone's ability to do so. Part 5 is building your confidence and self-esteem. I don't mean the confidence to be able to talk to that girl or guy that you like, or the self-esteem to be loved by everyone else in a room. That's superficial confidence. I mean having full confidence in yourself. Having the confidence to beat the odds of addiction. Thinking of yourself as a better, more worthwhile person. Lack of confidence and low self-esteem are huge traits that not only drive people to use, but keep people from ever even wanting to get sober. The sad part is, it's not so much outside forces that are destroying your confidence and self-esteem, but you yourself are allowing your brain to destroy it. When in active addiction, I would constantly degrade my own self-worth. I would skip out on things like taking a shower and brushing my teeth. My thought process was like, why polish a turd? I destroyed my own confidence. Part 5 of this series is where everything I've spoken about in the previous 4 videos starts to come together. To start, or even want to build your self-esteem and confidence, you need a why. Like I said in the first video, if your why is, I just want to get sober, you will fail. You need something bigger. You need a purpose. Having that purpose, that reason for being here, is going to help you build your self-worth. Having that purpose in life will raise your self-esteem, push you to become a more productive person each day, and will help to define you. There's a saying, your biology is not your destiny. Your addiction, your disease, illness, whatever you want to call it, is not who you are. These 12-step programs define its members as exactly that. I'm Dave and I have the disease of addiction. You don't hear people with cancer walking around saying, I'm Dave and I have the disease of cancer. They don't let it define who they are. In part 2, we went over shedding the victimhood and powerless mentality. It is incredibly hard to build your self-esteem when you're telling yourself that everything is out of your control, when you're telling yourself, oh, all these bad things are happening just because it's me, and you're blaming everyone else for your problems. When you do this, you are only distancing yourself from being able to fix the issues. It gives you a huge sense of accomplishment and boosts your confidence when you realize you yourself can fix these issues that you once thought were out of your control. These 12-step groups do an excellent job of breaking down and devaluing confidence, teaching its members you're powerless, you're powerless, you're powerless, telling them things like you can't be too stupid to get the program, but you can be too smart, teaching them, oh, willpower kills, stay away from willpower. It's like their goal is to break its members down to never build them back up. This is how you keep people from ever building confidence. In part 3, we went over taking control of your brain. When it comes to building self-esteem and confidence, this is the most important. If you let it, your brain will destroy your confidence, your self-worth, and your self-esteem. Taking control of your brain is what will help you separate what are only false, negative brain messages and what are productive, valuable thoughts. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough, I'm worthless, I can't do this, are all examples of negative brain messages. Nothing more than mindless, empty thoughts. Thoughts that AA and NA instill in people, like you're powerless, or once an addict, always an addict, are nothing more than mindless, empty thoughts. The way to combat this are with the 4 steps that we went over in part 3. Relabel, reframe, refocus, and revalue. It is much harder to build self-esteem and confidence when you're going to an NA meeting every night calling yourself a powerless addict, or going to an AA meeting and calling yourself a powerless drunk every night. Move on to part 4, and we went over removing everything toxic in your life. You can't build confidence and self-esteem when you are surrounded by and living in a toxic environment. Surrounded by friends that will only get jealous and spiteful at the sight of you improving. In a relationship that makes you unhappy and makes you feel like you don't amount to anything. In a career that makes you miserable and makes you feel like you're going nowhere in life. When you're a young woman in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, where men are more concerned and focused on your body than they are seeing you get sober. These are examples of toxic environments that will kill your confidence and self-esteem. You need to surround yourself with people that will support your growth and help to build your confidence. Not only that, but building these traits takes time, it takes patience, and understanding that is very important. Every single day when first getting sober, I'd write out 5 things that I liked about myself, or 5 things that I did well. Along with that, I'd also write out 3 to 5 things I wanted to accomplish that day in regards to a specific goal. For example, I drove my credit into the ground while in active addiction. Absolutely destroyed it. So for months, my daily goals revolved around improving my credit. Over time, I slowly watched my credit score improve. Not only did this help me in many aspects of life, but it brought me a lot more confidence being able to say, wow, if I was able to improve that, I do have more control over my life than I thought. Things as simple as getting a shower and brushing your teeth every day can help build self-esteem. Taking better care of yourself, both mentally and physically, helps you to grow more respect for yourself. Not getting a shower gave me an excuse to sit around the house all day and just dwell on my self-loathing. Simply taking a shower made me feel more productive, more confident in leaving the house to go get things done. One of the most obvious ways of building self-esteem and confidence is physical fitness. If you're not happy with the shape you're in, then go out and change it. Gyms are offering memberships for as low as $10 a month, and even if that's too much, you don't need a gym to work out or go for a run. But just as building self-esteem and confidence takes time, so does physical fitness. Most people let their brain get the best of them, think up 101 different excuses of why to stop going to the gym, or after just 1 week saying, oh, no results, see, this doesn't work. Your body is not just going to change overnight. But the payoff, being thrilled and happy with how you look in the mirror, is a huge confidence and self-esteem booster. There are a million ways out there to boost your confidence and self-esteem. You just need to take the time to look for them. Rather than listening to music or the radio when you ride to work every morning, listen to a YouTube video on how to build confidence. Or before bed, instead of watching movies, read a book on building self-esteem. The answers for any individual out there looking to build self-esteem and confidence are out there if you just look. And that'll do it for part 5, and I'll see you for the conclusion next week. Part 6 of how to get sober and how AA and these 12-step programs oppose anyone's ability to do so. Part 6 simply is to move on with your life. What I mean is, once you have finally gotten sober, and you have finally overcome the mental restraints drug and alcohol have had on you, it's time to move on to bigger, better, and more important things in your life. Once you move on from solely focusing on drugs and alcohol, you can then start to focus on the underlying issues that led to your addiction in the first place. Issues that, once addressed, will keep you from ever even wanting to use again. Smart recovery, rational recovery, moderation management, life ring, SOS, all teach people to overcome their addiction, moving on to bigger and better things in their life. 12-step groups offer no such solution. Very much the opposite, actually. 12-step groups, AA and these 12-step groups, are the only groups that teach their members that they suffer a lifelong illness to drugs and alcohol. That once an addict, you are always an addict. That you must devote the rest of your life to this program. That you need to put this program before your family and your own children. Rather than work on breaking codependency issues, they only enable these issues. Just like the drugs these members were addicted to, they believe this cult is their lifeline, that without it they will die. They teach their members to rely only on the program. You'll hear it all the time from these members. Oh, AA saved my life. Without NA I would be dead. AA was the miracle of my life. They denounce members from taking any credit for themselves, constantly asking their members to thank and praise them. These groups can fool people into wasting an entire lifetime in their rooms. People who have relapsed 5, 10, 15 times and will still mindlessly say, well, it works if you work it. Their sponsors telling them, oh, see, you didn't work it right that time. Better luck next time. Rather than telling them, hey, maybe this program isn't for you. Maybe you should try something else. But no, they tell them to wait for the miracle to happen. And this is how it works. Then, when the person is beaten down and their life is destroyed beyond all repair, and the person finally chooses to get sober out of no other option, AA says, see, the program does work. The miracle has happened. Just keep coming back. Keep coming back. Keep coming back. Yeah, keep coming back until it kills you. This dogma is preached and instilled upon its newer members by sponsors. In these 12-step groups, you will have a sponsor, a self-proclaimed expert on addiction. They teach its members that for the rest of their life, they will need a sponsor to help make all grown-up decisions for them. People that have enough persuasion to tell a judge if you should or should not be able to see your children. Enough persuasion that some of the sponsors here in my community are lawyers and judges themselves. I say, what gives them this right? To be a sponsor, there are no regulations other than you need a year sober, which many of the members just lie about to become one. No medical training, no formal classes, no regulations on who can and cannot be a sponsor, nothing. The mentally unstable, immature, incompetent, these are the people responsible for getting kids off drugs? I think not. A perfect example of the blind leading the blind. These 12-step groups like to boast, oh, well, who better to get a drunk or addict better than another drunk or addict? We don't need doctors and medicine. I heard a great analogy the other day on this subject. It's like saying, yeah, who better to get a homeless guy off the street than another homeless guy that's on the street. You know, to help him find a good job, build his credit, apply for a loan. This is nonsense. Learn to think for yourself. Learn to move on with your life and better other aspects of your life. Much more success, happiness, and value in your life will follow. As I said in the last video, your addiction does not define who you are. You will never overcome addiction in these 12-step groups. Drugs and alcohol still run their members' lives, allowing drugs and alcohol to still dictate their lives, places they can go, people you can and cannot associate with. For life, spending countless hours obsessing over and worshiping drugs and alcohol in a church basement. Living in the past of your own drug use, constantly sharing your own life experience of drug use. How could you ever possibly say you're free of addiction living this lifestyle? These programs then like to compare out, oh, we're like other programs too. We tell people just to take what they need from the program and leave the rest. Then in the same breath tell their members the consequences for leaving the cult are jails, institutions, and death. This is a cheap sales trick to keep never-ending doubt in people's mind. The only thing benefiting from instilling this mentality are these 12-step based rehabs that are raking in millions due to return customers. These 12-step groups do not want to see addiction end. Without addiction, without being able to sponsor people, without their rooms being full of donating people, their lives would be meaningless. Without this cult, their lives would be meaningless. They get their meaning from seeing people suffer. They don't want courts to stop ordering pedophiles and sex offenders into their rooms. They're just more people for donations to them, cowardly putting their own members at risk. Do not fall into this false dogma. You do not have to live a life where drugs and alcohol dictate and run your life. You don't have to identify yourself as an addict or alcoholic. Move forward with your life, not constantly reminding yourself and glorifying the days of your drug use. Once you move on from this, once you stop focusing on nothing other than drugs and alcohol, you can then start to focus on bigger, deeper aspects of your life. Make drugs and alcohol a thing of the past, a distant memory, and move forward with your life. This is the only way to be truly free of addiction. And that'll do it for this 6-part series. And I'll see you guys for the next one. Thank you.